All right, getting into it today, huh? We're taking a deep dive into something that, honestly, I think a lot of people only think they understand. PTSD.
Yeah, it's one of those things like everyone knows the acronym, but the nuance gets lost.
Uh,
It's like our source material here. Fascinating stuff, by the way.
oh, totally. I was just thinking, like, diving into this is going to be like peeling back the layers of an iceberg.
Perfect analogy.
Yeah.
Because you see the tip, right? The classic signs, but underneath, whole other story.
Right. And that's the thing, like, we got to get below the surface. For example, one of our sources mentioned a school teacher who developed PTSD after a car accident.
See, that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
When you think PTSD, you don't usually picture like a teacher, do you?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which just shows you how limiting that kind of narrow view of PTSD can be.
Totally.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing is, those stereotypes, they can be really harmful.
Because people don't recognize the signs. Like, they think, oh, it's just combat vets.
Ghastly. And then they don't get the help they need, right?
Our source from the American Psychiatric Association, they were really strong on that point. Like, those misconceptions are a huge barrier to treatment.
For sure. It's not just about who gets it, it's also about the symptoms. People think it's just flashbacks.
Oh, yeah. Or like being jumpy. And don't get me wrong, those are real things. But it's so much deeper.
Right. It's not just about reliving the trauma. It's like this rewiring of how your brain sees danger.
Like your body is stuck on high alert even when you're safe.
Yes. And that's why it shows up in so many ways. Emotionally, physically, how you act. Our source called it like a cluster of experiences. It affects everything.
So it's not just the event, right? There's got to be other stuff.
Oh, definitely. That's where things get really interesting. Risk factors. We got to talk about those.
Risk factors. Okay, you're going to have to break that down for me.
Think about it.
Yeah.
Two people, same car accident. One's okay. The other develops PTSD. Why? Because everyone's different. Pre-existing conditions, genetics, even who you've got in your corner when things get rough. It all matters.
So having a good support system can actually protect you from PTSD.
100%. Having people you can talk to who get it, that makes all the difference in how your brain handles trauma.
It's wild, right? Just having people there for you can literally change how your brain deals with trauma. But let's talk more about recognizing the signs of PTSD. Because knowing what causes it is one thing, but how do you actually see it?
Well, that's where those clusters of experiences come in, right? Emotional, physical, behavioral. Like our source talks about how someone with PTSD might go from being super anxious to feeling almost empty.
Oh, totally. It's like their emotions are totally out of whack. Our source described it as like watching your life from a distance. That's got to be so disorienting.
Absolutely. And then on top of that, you've got the physical stuff. Can't sleep, aches and pains, heart racing for like no reason. Imagine just trying to go about your day when you feel like that all the time.
Yeah, it's like your body's stuck in fight or flight mode 24/7. No wonder it's hard to just like chill out.
Exactly. And that feeds into the behavioral stuff too, like someone might start avoiding anything that reminds them of what happened.
Right, like they're trying to outrun their own memories.
Yeah.
But you can't outrun PTSD.
Nope. And then there's that hypervigilance, always on edge.
Every little sound is a threat. It's exhausting. So clearly, this isn't about willpower. This is like a real medical condition. Which brings us to treatment, right? What can someone actually do about PTSD?
Well, here's the good news. A lot, actually. Like, there's no magic bullet, but there are really effective treatments out there. Our source really emphasized a two-pronged approach, therapy and medication.
Okay, let's break that down. What kind of therapy?
So one of the big ones is CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. Basically helps you identify those negative thought patterns that keep you stuck.
So retraining your brain.
Exactly. And then there's EMDR, eye movement desensitization, and reprocessing.
Whoa, that sounds intense. What even is that?
So it uses sensory stuff like eye movements to help your brain process those traumatic memories. It's kind of like creating new pathways around the trauma.
So instead of reliving it with the same intensity, it's more manageable.
Yeah, exactly. Really powerful, especially if someone's not ready to like dive into talking about the trauma directly.
Wow. Okay, but you also mentioned medication. What's that about?
So medication can be super helpful for those really tough symptoms. Like crippling anxiety, depression, not being able to sleep. It's not about erasing anything, but it gives you space to actually do the therapy.
Ah, so it's like getting a little breathing room so you can focus on healing.
Exactly. And this is where like the Avengers of PTSD treatment comes in.
The Avengers.
All right, you want a whole team. Therapists, psychiatrists, maybe support groups, all working together. because everyone's different, their needs are different.
I love that. The Avengers of mental health, so empowering. But even with the best team, it's not just on the professionals, right? What can people do themselves?
You're so right. Self-care is huge. Our source actually talked about mindfulness and meditation being really helpful.
Oh, yeah, I can see that. Just like finding some peace when your brain is going a mile a minute.
Totally. And it's not just mental, right? Mindfulness helps you get in tune with your body too.
So it's like building a toolbox of coping mechanisms. I like that.
Right. And let's not forget social support. Having those people who get it, who you can just be yourself around, that's crucial.
That feeling of connection, like we were saying before, PTSD makes you feel so alone. So having that safety net, whether it's friends, family, a support group, huge.
Huge. And actually, our source mentioned a few organizations doing great work. Mind, Rethink Mental Illness, Combat Stress. We'll link to those in the show notes.
Yes, because it's one thing to say get support. It's another to actually know where to go. Having those resources can be life-changing.
Exactly. It's about empowering people to take that first step, to know they don't have to suffer in silence.
And that ripple effect is huge, right? Like our source really got into how PTSD doesn't just stay with you. It affects your relationships, your work, everything.
It's true. Imagine like trying to be in a relationship when you're dealing with all that invisible baggage from trauma. Our source talked about how PTSD can lead to like not communicating well, pulling away, even just misunderstandings that create distance.
It's like you're both trying to build something, but you're speaking different languages almost. And if the partner doesn't get the PTSD, it's easy to take it personally, right?
Well, 100%. That's why understanding is so important, not just for the person with PTSD, but for everyone around them. Knowing what's going on makes a huge difference.
It's about having compassion, not judgment. And work, too. Imagine trying to focus when your mind is like hijacked by these memories, or every time the phone rings, you jump out of your skin.
Talk about stressful. Our source said PTSD can make it hard to concentrate, handle pressure, even just show up consistently. And it's not because the person doesn't want to, it's the PTSD messing with their brain.
It's like you wouldn't expect someone with a broken leg to run a marathon. Their brain is healing from a serious injury. And the thing is, our source said if it's not addressed, it can actually lead to even more problems down the line.
Yeah, early intervention is key. Because PTSD doesn't usually just disappear. And the longer it goes on, the higher the chances of like depression, anxiety, even substance abuse.
It's like it snowballs. But the good news is our source was really big on this. PTSD is treatable. Recovery is possible.
Totally. It's not a life sentence. It's a journey. And that journey starts with awareness, knowing what PTSD is, how to recognize it, and how to get help.
Which is exactly what we've tried to do today. Give you the info you need. We've covered so much, the causes, symptoms, how it's treated, even how it affects things like relationships and work.
And the biggest takeaway, you don't have to go through this alone. There's hope, there's help, there's a whole community out there ready to support you.
So if you're listening and you're struggling, or you know someone who is, remember, asking for help is a sign of strength. Find a therapist, a support group. Check out those organizations we mentioned. Your recovery matters, and they're people who care.
We'll leave you with this. We've talked about the impact of PTSD on individuals, but it goes way beyond that. It affects families, communities, all of us. So how can we create a world that's more understanding, more supportive? A world where people who've been through trauma feel safe, heard, and empowered to heal. That's something to think about.